So if Dr. Stewart feels like a fish out of water, I must be a tadpole out of water. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and for everything all of you do to advocate on behalf of people with mental illnesses. I am especially grateful to Dr. Pardis and Dr. Bornstein and Brain and Behavior Research Foundation and the amazing researchers who are leading the way in brain research with the hope of having a cure one day for these horrible, debilitating illnesses. I also want to thank Dr. Stewart for her unwavering support of the work that we do and for her tremendous work as president of the APA. When I became a judge, I had no idea I was actually becoming the gatekeeper to the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida. And sadly, that's the Miami-Dade County Jail. While the United States has 5% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's inmates. Think about that for a moment. As we sit here this afternoon, 1 out of 104 adults in the United States are in jail or prison, and 1 out of 33 adults in the United States are under correctional supervision. Since 1980, the number of people going to jail or prison in the United States has tripled, and their sentences have increased by 166%. As you drill down deeper, what you will find is much of this is due to untreated mental illness and substance use disorders. In fact, people with mental illnesses are 9 times more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized. They are 18 times more likely to find a bed in the criminal justice system than at any state civil hospital. Annually, almost 2 million people a year with serious mental illnesses are arrested, and on any given day, we have approximately 550,000 people with serious mental illnesses in jails and prisons, and another 900,000 on some type of correctional supervision. In fact, 40% of all people with serious mental illnesses in this country at some point in their life will come into contact with the criminal justice system. This is a shameful American tragedy, and it is one that must be reversed. And if you're not touched by the inhumanity of this problem, you should be touched by the financial consequences. Last year in the United States, our counties collectively spent $80 billion on correctional costs, and our state spent another $71 billion in prisons. It is getting so bad that in the United States, counties are now having to decide, do I build a new jail or a new hospital? Do I build a new jail or a new school? Do I build a new jail or do I build a new road? I want to start with a short video that was produced by my local CBS affiliate that does a wonderful but horrifying job of capturing the real tragedy of this situation.
Now, live, this is CBS 4 News at 11.
Life here is dirty, deplorable, dangerous.
I can't breathe it now.
Tonight, CBS 4 takes you to a place cameras are rarely allowed to reveal what's happening in our downtown jail to the inmates on the forgotten floor.
The people who spend their days and nights in these jail cells all suffer from mental illness. They're accused criminals, not guilty in the eyes of the law, but forced to live in conditions you cannot imagine.
Our chief investigative reporter, Michelle Gillen, has been given unprecedented television access to reveal what's going on. Michelle joins us now, and I was shocked, to say the least, when I saw this.
I think certainly it is time for the public to see what is going on. The pictures you are about to see are indeed haunting and most disturbing. Hundreds of men with mental illnesses, many crammed into tiny cells. Some arrested for minor crimes that advocates say would have the average person out of jail in just hours. But incredibly, there is no place to send them. Tonight, our cameras take you inside a world rarely exposed, the forgotten floor.
And then they get thrown into a cell.
I can't breathe it now.
Prison insiders call this the forgotten floor, but it seems unimaginable that the horrendous, be it horrifying conditions of a jail spilling over with inmates suffering from mental illnesses could be erased from any sane man's mind. As frigid air is pumped into sealed cells, some beg for help for the barest of necessities, water. The faucets are dry. The water's not working.
The water's not working. He's drinking sewer water. He's drinking toilet water out of the toilet.
We'll get you water. It doesn't work, the faucets. The faucets aren't working. These stench-filled cells were designed for one person, outfitted with only a single steel shelf for a bed.
In this one, there's 3 inmates in a cell for one.
Yet 2, 3, sometimes even 5 men diagnosed with mental illnesses, in most cases arrested for low-level felony crimes, in some cases misdemeanors, are locked up for days, weeks, months. Tell me about you. Tell me, living in this, what do you want the public to know tonight?
I want the public to know that people in here, they're urinating on the floor, and we have to sleep on top of it. They're defecating on the floor, and you have to sleep on top of it. There's only one bunker that's made of steel.
And how many people are in your cell?
There is 4 in here right now.
They are only allowed out of their cell for 15 minutes 2 times a week.
30 minutes a week they're allowed out.
So other than a half an hour,
That's it.
this is it. They
Right.
are in this room.
Lights are on 24/7. The conditions you see just do not change.
I've been in Vietnam. After 18 months in Vietnam, it's worse conditions in here. I wouldn't put a dog in here.
A chilling perspective from the jail's chief psychiatrist, Dr. Joseph Portier.
You would think that in 2006, we would treat people with chronic mental illness in a much better, more humane manner. But unfortunately, we're reverting back to how it was in the 16 and 1700s, which is terrible. It's morally incomprehensible.
A sentiment echoed by an outraged Miami-Dade County judge, Steve Leifman.
This is like a secret that people don't know about.
Yeah, it's a bad secret, and it's a sad secret.
What most of you don't know is that the Miami-Dade jail now serves as the largest psychiatric facility in the state of Florida. 3 of 9 floors burgeoning with inmates suffering from mental illnesses and, according to Leifman, in desperate need of treatment. Not this type of confinement designed to punish people.
5 times as many people in our jail with mental illness than any psychiatric hospital in Florida. 5 times.
In this, right here?
Right here.
An elderly man emerges from the dirt and darkness.
There's 1 on the floor underneath the bunk and 1 or 2 standing around waiting for their turn to sleep.
And the crisis has unfolded across the state. In other Florida jails where they strive to comply with all the national standards for housing inmates, frustration over the virtual abandonment of mentally ill inmates left by the state to languish in jail cells for months runs deep. Colonel David Parrish.
Can you imagine the chaos that would result in the local criminal justice system if I stood at the booking door and said, sorry, we don't have any more room, we're not taking them from you, law enforcement?
Parrish from Hillsborough County says local authorities had no choice but to sue the state of Florida to force the Department of Children and Families to comply with their legal mandate to transfer mentally ill inmates to a treatment facility within 15 days.
Jails should not be the de facto mental health facility for a county, but that's what they are in the United States.
You had your birthday here. How old were you?
I was 21.
21.
Yes, ma'am.
And you've been here 8 months.
Yes, ma'am.
In Pinellas County, the weight of incarcerating and caring for mentally ill inmates had everyone paying a price, an unacceptable one, according to Major Kirk Brunner.
We are not a treatment facility, and these people that you saw in Delta 1, the one that plucked his eye out, They need to be in a treatment facility, which is the responsibility of the state, not our responsibility.
And therein lies the danger. William Weaver Sr. was caring for his 40-year-old son, Bill, at home. A son he says suffered from schizophrenia but functioned well for decades until his medicine was changed. Then one night, according to police records, he attacked his elderly father, who called police and urged them to arrest his son, hoping this would trigger treatment.
Because he was under the false idea that if he got arrested, he'd get treatment.
Bill ended up locked up in a cell on floor 9 of the Miami-Dade Pretrial Detention Center for several months. According to authorities, Bill jumped from this top bunk bed, cracking his skull and breaking his neck. He's now a quadriplegic who needs hospitalization to stay alive. We met up with his father, who had just left his hospital bed.
Do you think anything has come from the incident of what your son went through?
Nothing. Nothing's changed. Do I think something could change? I don't know. I don't know. It's time. It's time. Something changed. But I don't know if it ever will.
Pretty tragic look at the state of our mental health system, not just in Miami-Dade, but around the United States. But things do change. It took us 11 years, but we shut down that horrific 9th floor. But tragically, the young man in the video passed away as a result of his injuries a few years ago. We believe his father passed away a year or two later, probably from a broken heart. My journey into the mental health world actually began one morning when I was getting ready to go on the bench. I was approached by the assistant public defender and the assistant state attorney, and they asked me if I would speak to a young man who was in jail on a case I was about to hear. At the time, I was handling what we call a misdemeanor jail division. Those are for people with the smallest, most minor offenses you could possibly have, but they're still in custody. There's usually 3 kinds of people in that division. There are those with attached felonies who are not allowed out of custody. There are those that are just too poor and cannot afford to bond out of custody. And then there are those with mental illnesses that have no idea how to get out of custody. So this lovely couple came in. They were very sophisticated, and they were very, very devastated. The mom was crying, the dad was shaking, and they literally began to beg me to get their son help. They told me that he was brilliant. He had gone to Harvard. He had a late onset of schizophrenia, and he was now homeless and recycling through the criminal system, and they just didn't know what to do. I was pretty new at the time, and I think when you're a new judge, you think you have a lot more power and a lot more wisdom than you really do. And I made the mistake of promising them that I would get their son help, because I was under this illusion that, because I deal in logic, and I knew if you got arrested and you had a heart attack, there was a healthcare system in our correctional system that we would take care of them. And I just assumed that if you got arrested and you had a serious mental illness, we must have a system of care for people with mental illnesses as well. So as I began to go back into the courtroom, the mom stopped me and she said, "Judge, there's one more thing I need to tell you about my son. Not only is he brilliant, but respectfully, he probably knows more about the mental health system than you do." And I looked at her and I was a little taken back. And I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Well, you see, my son, he is the former head of psychiatry at Jackson Memorial Hospital," which was my reaction. I went into the courtroom and I called his case, and he stood, and we started to have an amazing conversation. He was coherent, he was thoughtful, he was more respectful than the lawyers, and I'm thinking, man, maybe there's something wrong with the folks. Except when I looked at him, he looked like a homeless man that hadn't bathed in months. And he was on some ridiculous offense. It wasn't even a statutory offense. It was some minor county ordinance like possession of a dairy cart, which a lot of homeless people would get picked up on. And he kept insisting there was nothing wrong with him, and if I would only release him, he would go see a psychiatrist, he'd get evaluated, he'd come back, but he had no kind of mental health disorder, and would I please release him? I really didn't want to keep a guy in jail on possession of a dairy cart. I said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "Sure, Your Honor, anything." I said, "I just don't understand one thing. You keep insisting there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And if that's the case, why would a Harvard-educated psychiatrist be in jail, be homeless, and recycling through the system? And all of a sudden, he got a look on his face that I will not forget to the day I die. It was a look of total horror and fear. And all of a sudden, he started cupping his ears, and he started shaking back and forth, and he had a full-blown psychotic episode, and he started pointing to the back of the courtroom where his parents were standing. And he started screaming at the top of his lungs. And everything he said was in sixes. And he started yelling, "Your Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor, you have to have the cup removed, you have to have the cup removed, you have to have the cup removed." And I said to him, "Aren't those your parents?" "No, no, no, real parents, died, Holocaust, Holocaust, Holocaust." And they're from the CIA, CIA, CIA. And they came to kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me. And the only thing that you could hear at that moment was his poor mother crying. Now, at the time, judges in Florida had absolutely no training on how to identify people with mental illnesses, what to do with people with mental illnesses. All I had been told is that if someone acts strange or bizarre, order a psychological evaluation. And I didn't even know what I was supposed to do with the evaluation when it came back. I ordered an evaluation. It came back 3 weeks later. He's now in jail for 6 weeks on possession of a dairy cart. And the evaluation said, excuse me, that not only was he incompetent, but he met criteria for involuntary hospitalization. I'm thinking, this is great. At the time, I needed 3 evaluations. I ordered 2 more. He's in jail 10, 12 weeks on possession of a dairy cart. All 3 evaluations come back. He's incompetent to stand trial. He meets criteria for hospitalization. And I give the evaluations to the lawyers. I'm about to order him into involuntary hospitalization. And I notice that the lawyer has a grin on her face. I will tell you, as a former public defender, it's a bad sign. I don't have too many lawyers in here, but she then uttered words that most lawyers will appreciate, you may not. She said, "Your Honor, in all due respect." And when a lawyer says that to a judge, trust me, it has nothing to do with respect. That's how they tell us we're idiots and we don't know what we're doing. And she whips out a Florida Supreme Court opinion, which I had never seen, that had come out maybe 3 months earlier, that said county court judges have absolutely no authority to involuntarily hospitalize anybody. I am to release them to the street, tell them to go see a doctor, and come back. Could you imagine? I have no choice. I follow the law. I release him, and I've never seen him again. I cannot tell you today if he is dead or alive. Not only did I not fulfill the promise I made his parents, but I put him at risk. I put the community at risk. I probably put my job at risk. God forbid he went out and did something terrible or something terrible happened to him. I went back to my chambers. I was pretty upset myself, and I was determined never to allow this to happen again. And I got on the phone, I started making calls, and I learned 3 very valuable lessons that morning. One, it turned out that Miami-Dade truly has a serious mental health crisis. We have 9.1% of our population living with a very serious mental illness. Excuse me. That is almost 3 times the national average. It's 197,000 adults and 55,000 children living in my community with very serious illnesses. And at the time, 35% of the inmates in my jail were on psychotropic medication, and we were spending $500,000 a day. That's $180 million a year to warehouse people in that hellhole. And because conditions are not conducive to treatment for people with mental illness in my jail and most jails in the United States, people with serious mental illnesses generally stay 4 to 8 times longer in jail than someone without a mental illness for the exact same charge. And because we had done such a lousy job training our police on how to address these issues, we had had 25 people at that point with serious mental illnesses die during an encounter with a police officer because they just didn't know how to handle the issue. That was my first lesson. My second lesson, it turned out this was not just a local problem, but it turned out to be a state and national problem as well. Former Surgeon General David Satcher called mental illness the silent epidemic of our times. If you work in the criminal justice system, trust me, there is absolutely nothing silent about this epidemic. We hear their cries and their screams every single day. And the third lesson, and maybe the most difficult lesson I learned that day, is that our community mental health system, our crisis system, and our laws are antiquated, fragmented. They do not reflect modern research and science, and certainly not what we're learning at such an amazing event today. And they need great reform. I've been doing this now for almost 18 years, and one thing has become abundantly clear to me, that if we treated people with primary health in this country the way we treated people with mental illness, not only would there be this plethora of civil lawsuits, there would probably be indictments for gross negligence. And I don't understand why people aren't angrier about it. I mean, what other illness is it okay to discharge people in the middle of the night, homeless, psychotic, and then arrest them when we don't provide them the services that they need because we know treatment works? You know, you all may have seen these great ads by Cancer Centers of America. It's like, God forbid you get cancer. We're going to find you the best doctor and get you the best treatment and take care of your housing and your mental health issues. I am here to tell you that mental illness is treated the exact opposite way. I took my dog to the vet 2 weeks ago on a Saturday. They were open on Saturday. Good luck finding a mental health provider on Saturday. No big deal. He was fine. I brought him back. First thing Monday morning, the vet called to see how my dog was. Good luck getting a call after your discharge from a mental health crisis center. If you'd indulge me for one moment, I want to read from an article on mental health that I recently reviewed that I think speaks volumes of where we are. The past few years have seen an increasing amount of interest manifested in mental health and psychiatry. The existing legal procedures treat people with mental illnesses as criminals instead of people who are ill. Booking a person with mental illness in jail is unnecessary and undesirable. Police officers should be replaced by trained representatives of hospitals to effect the transfer of patients from their homes to the hospital or from one hospital to another. All laws concerning mental health should be integrated to eliminate inefficiency and duplication. In the past, psychiatry has suffered because of its isolation from general medicine. Integrating psychiatry into the general practice of medicine is in line with modern trends of medical education and hospital practice. The article goes on and talks about the importance of community education, how we have to educate parents and children, teachers, physicians, judges, jurors, clergy, employers, employees, and the public in general. And these are just a few of the comments and recommendations that were published in the American Journal of Psychiatry in January of 1939. And so when it comes to developing systems of care for people with mental illnesses, we have lost ground. The history is replete with horror, from deinstitutionalization of the hospitals, the war on crime, the war on drugs, sentencing guidelines, the failure to fund President Kennedy's Community Mental Health Act, all created the perfect storm. And two wonderful ironies arose. One is we never deinstitutionalized. What we in fact did is we allowed for the transfer of responsibility from these really horrible, crappy hospitals to these really horrible, crappy jails. And in many ways, making things worse, because now not only do you need to deal with the stigma of having a serious mental illness, now you have the stigma of a mental illness and being a criminal, making it harder to get housing, making it harder to get employment, making it harder to develop relationships, to have a healthy life. And the sadder and maybe crueler irony is we have come full circle, because 200 years ago, that's what we used to do in this country. We put people in jail because we didn't know any better. And with all the advances we have made in society over the last 200 years, this is the one area in civil rights we have lost ground, and we have failed people with mental illnesses miserably. We have seen homelessness increase. We have seen police injuries increase. We've seen police shootings of people with mental illnesses increase. We have wasted critical tax dollars. And in many ways, we have made mental illness a crime in this country. And if this wasn't disturbing enough, just think about the impact this is having on our local budgets and on our state and federal budgets. When we started our project, we wanted to see if we could narrow down the population that we wanted to address, to see if we could figure out who the most highest utilizers of criminal justice and mental health services were, so we could wrap our arms around a smaller subset of population to get the biggest bang from the buck, to get the people that were penetrating the system the most. We have a wonderful university in Florida, University of South Florida, that has these blended data sets that can tell a community this very answer. So we sent them the names of thousands of people that had been arrested in Miami-Dade over a 5-year period, figuring, okay, they'll narrow it down to 1,000 or 2, but that would be a wonderful start. We wait. Finally, a letter arrives, this nice thin letter. I open it up. I'm thinking, well, it looks like my response to applications to college. This isn't good. It's very thin. I open it up, and there's one piece of paper. And on the one piece of paper are the names of 97 people, primarily men, primarily diagnosed with schizophrenia, primarily homeless, primarily having what we call a co-occurring disorder, meaning both mental illness and substance use disorder, who over a 5-year period, these 97 people were arrested 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in that horrible jail, 13,000 days at a psychiatric facility or emergency room, and they cost taxpayers $13.7 million, and we got absolutely nothing for it. We would have been better off sending them to Harvard. They would have had an education, it would have been cheaper, they would have had housing, and they would have done much better, trust me. And if you think we're not spending money on mental health, oh, we are. But it is in all the wrong places. In this country, we spend billions of dollars trying to restore people to competency so we can try them. Just to give you a classic example, in the great state of Florida, where the emphasis is often on the state's last 2 letters, we spend almost 25% of our entire adult mental health budget, that's $144 million, to restore competency for 2,500 people. While at the same time, we have between 130 and 140,000 people in Florida who at the time of their arrest have acute mental illness and need immediate treatment. But 25% of the money goes to restore people not even charged with that serious of offense, who maybe if they were all charged with rape, murder, or arson, it would be worth the money. But for 70% of the people that we spend $144 million on a year, 3 things happen to them. They either have the charges dropped, they get credit for time served or probation, and they walk out the front door of a courthouse without any access to treatment. It is the absolute definition of insanity, where we keep doing the same thing again and again, and we expect a different outcome. And if that wasn't horrible enough, listen to these numbers. While most prison population growth in the United States has started to level out, the mental health population in those prisons has not. In my own state, over the last 12 years, we've seen about a 50% increase in the number of people going to prison. But the percentage of people with mental illnesses going to prison grew by 178%. And if we don't do something soon to curb that, we're going to have to build 10 new prisons over the next 10 years. Well, guess what? The cost to build and operate 10 new prisons over 10 years in Florida is $2.5 billion. And the average stay for someone in prison in Florida with mental illness is only 2.5 to 4 years because they're not committing serious offenses. People with mental illnesses are no more dangerous than the general population. Recovery rates are better for people with mental illness than heart disease and diabetes. And they're much more likely to be victims of violent crimes than perpetrators. There's something terribly wrong with a society that's willing to spend more money to imprison people that are ill than to treat them. So how do you fix it? Dr. Stewart touched upon it. It's all, unfortunately, in the local government hands. There's not a switch I can flip to fix this problem nationally. It has to be done county by county by county. So after this horrible situation that we had with the psychiatrist, fortuitously, the first national meeting of its kind on this issue happened to be in Miami. And we started to learn that there was a way out of this hell. And I think one of the best things about being a judge is it's good to be judged, because when you invite people to meetings, they come even if they don't want to be there. And I can tell you that's really true, because my age totally corresponds to the deinstitutionalization movement in this country. And I used to be chief of the county court for the public defender in Miami. And all of a sudden, one year, we went from having no clients with serious mental illnesses to a ton of clients with serious mental illness. And guess what had happened? The local state hospital had closed. Of course, no one told us. No one provided treatment. They ended up on the street. They ended up in jail. So as a public defender, as chief of the county court, I sent a letter to all these wonderful stakeholders saying, hey, we have this big problem. It's growing. I don't know what to do about it. Let's have a meeting. I sent a letter to all these people. I show up. I'm all excited. Not one person showed up. It's okay. I got appointed to the bench 2 years later. I had this horrible situation with the doctor. I sent out the same letter on my new stationery, and they were there early. And we wouldn't let him out of the room for 2 days. Seriously. And we mapped out how our criminal justice system intersected with our community mental health system. And what we found is that we were embarrassingly dysfunctional. We, the sane, healthy people, had developed and devised a system that was designed to fail. And it's not nefarious. No one's done this on purpose. It's not one party. It's not one institution. It's not one human being. It is a perfect storm with a lot of different issues that have gone on. And I remember all of us looking around the room one day because we had the police chiefs and the sheriff and the judges and the state attorney and the public defender. And we had to ask ourselves who was more sick. Us so-called sane, smart people that created this terrible system, or the people that are so ill going through every one of our systems every single day, and not one person was accountable for them. The judges were judging, the police were policing, the prosecutor prosecuting, and we were all watching these people go by us every single day. Like they were faceless, like they had no names, like they weren't human beings. The same people you walk by on the street every single day. And we said, we're not going to do this, and we developed a written collaborative agreement. And we kept something in mind they had done in Seattle, because I had 3 experts helping me do this, and one of the experts was Seattle, and they took a room of people like you to a local park. And they took their purses and their wallets and their IDs and said, you have a serious mental illness, and tomorrow at 9 you need to be in court at 9 o'clock. At 10:30 you need to go see your probation officer. You have an appointment with your psychiatrist at 1, and you can go pick up your medication at 3. Good luck. Think about it. And we wonder why so many people are in jail. So we created a 3-part system. A pre-arrest system, a post-arrest system, and a competency restoration alternative program. The pre-arrest was developed based on what's called crisis intervention team policing. It's a 40-hour training program that teaches the police on how to identify people with mental illnesses, how to de-escalate a situation, and where to take people as opposed to arresting them. Look, it was not easy. I have 38 departments, 38 different cultures, and the last thing the police wanted was a civilian judge who knew nothing about their work to tell them how to do their job. But after this wonderful video came out, a grand jury then was impaneled to look at this issue and basically indicted our police departments for not doing a better job. They were shooting 2 people a month with serious mental illnesses, 1 fatally. We now have the largest trained squad of CIT officers in the United States. I have over 6,000 officers, and to give you an idea of the amazing work they have done, between 2010 through 2017, 2 of the 38, the 2 largest, Miami-Dade, handled 83,427 mental health calls. And out of the 83,427 mental health calls, they only made 139 arrests. The arrests in Dade County went from 118,000 a year when the project started to 56,000 today. Our jail audit was cut in half from 7,200 to about 4,000, and we closed one of our 3 main jails. And when people talk about this, they're usually intellectually dishonest. When they talk about cost savings, it's cost shifting, unless you close a jail. And the jail we closed has saved our county $12 million a year. It's been closed 6 years. The county really likes us. We then set up 3 post-arrest diversion programs. Now, anybody that's arrested on a misdemeanor in Dade County is out within 3 days if they meet criteria with a serious mental illness. They're transferred to a crisis stabilization unit because they're on a criminal hold. The 72 hours of the crisis care does not apply, so we reset the case for 2 weeks, which is what these people really need. I have 8 peers that work for me. 4 of them graduated from our program. They meet with this population, they help them reestablish relationships. Many of the people that we have, by the time they hit the criminal justice system, They have clinical depression because the system is beating the crap out of them and they just don't care. And while medication is so important for their recovery, people have to want to get better to be able to take the medication. And the peers do an amazing job of helping people reestablish relationships to want to get better. The first program we did, we started in the misdemeanor court because the state attorney was a little dubious about what we were trying to do. Within 2 years, the recidivism rate of misdemeanors dropped from 72% to 20%. She was so taken aback. She was so taken back, we expanded it to our non-felony population. That program has reduced our recidivism to about 25%, and in so far it has saved the county over 68 years of jail bed days. We then set up a forensic alternative program instead of just focusing on restoring people, meaning we make them competent to stand trial, which no one ever goes and does. We set up a system where we would focus on reintegrating them back into the community. And once they are stable and better, we take them out of that program and we put them in our felony diversion program. We watch them for another year. And in both situations, whether it's misdemeanor or felony, we actually drop the charges most of the time. So we're not criminalizing them and helping them with long-term recovery. All of these programs have improved our public safety. They have reduced police injuries. They have helped police get back to patrol more quickly. They have saved critical tax dollars. They have saved lives, and they have begun to decriminalize mental illness. And I will add this about the police, something that we had not even anticipated. Trauma is a huge issue for people that end up in the criminal justice system. 92% of the women in jail and prisons in the United States were sexually abused at a very early age, 6, 7, 8 years old. 92%. 75% of men in jail and prison in the United States with serious mental illness also have very sad and horrible histories of trauma. Some of it is sexual abuse, some of it is living in a home of domestic violence, some of it's living in a war zone on the street. And so I have all these psychiatrists to correct me, but what I've learned is that trauma is physiological. We have this little thing called the pituitary gland. It's your warning system. And so if you're in a horrible traumatic situation, like a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old girl getting sexually abused over a long-term period of time because it's familiar, it's not a stranger on the street. The pituitary gland sends a message to the adrenaline. The adrenaline releases a chemical called cortisol, and it overdoses the brain, and it alters the brain activity, and this is what PTSD is. But what we found is the police have the same problem. And so as we started to train our law enforcement officers about mental illness, they started calling my trainer. We get 150 calls a month from our police officers for their own personal mental health illnesses. There was a study this year that said police officers get 6 to 9 times more cortisol a day than we do. And they're the last people that want to go get treatment. They're embarrassed, they don't want to lose their gun, their jobs, and I think it also explains some of the shootings we see in this country. It's much more complicated than just race, but when you lay race over PTSD, it is a very toxic problem. Our shootings went, I told you, from 2 a month to maybe 5 or 6 in 8 years, and they love it. The police are our greatest advocates. They come to county commission meetings now asking for money for us to keep people out of jail. We're now building right now a first-of-its-kind one-stop shop facility. My county has been amazing. They have allocated $41.2 million to our project, and we're building this 7-story one-stop shop with all the essential elements of care in one location. So it's not fragmented, it's not complicated, and people can be treated like human beings. So instead of discharging and kicking you to the curb once we adjudicate your case, we will gently and slowly reintegrate you back into the community. Look, the current shortcomings of the community mental health system, criminal justice, and juvenile systems did not arise recently, nor did they arise of any one stakeholder's actions or inactions. No one party, no one person created this problem, and it's going to take an entire collaboration in every community to fix it. And when we finally do this, we will finally achieve what the United States Supreme Court asked us to do 40 years ago when they ordered the deinstitutionalization of our hospitals. Thank you very much.